Ever wonder how people survived massive rat infestations before modern exterminators? Did medieval folks just accept living alongside roaches and lice as part of daily life? Think again. Number 6. Magic and superstition. Could a simple spell rid your home of bugs? Medieval people certainly thought so. In the damp castles and cramped villages of medieval Europe, pests weren't just annoying, they were dangerous harbingers of disease and destruction. Without modern science to guide them, our ancestors turned to the supernatural for solutions that today might seem bizarre or even horrifying. Many households kept special charms to ward off vermin. In England, homeowners would write special incantations on small pieces of parchment and place them in the corners of granaries and food storage areas. These magical notes were believed to create an invisible barrier that mice and rats would refuse to cross. Some even went so far as to write threatening messages directly to the rats, as if the rodents could read and would be intimidated into leaving. One particularly strange practice involved catching a single rat, bat, or mouse, then setting it on fire and releasing it back into the wild. The medieval logic suggested the burning creature would run back to its nest and warn all the others to flee that dangerous location. Cruel, absolutely. Effective? Almost certainly not, except perhaps in the tragic case where the flaming animal might accidentally burn down the entire infested building. In rural areas, farmers often practiced a ritual called whistling up the mice. They would walk around their fields at dusk, whistling a specific tune that was supposed to call rats and mice from hiding. Once the pests emerged, the farmers would then loudly command them to leave the property and go to a neighbor's land instead. Some would even provide the rodents with a small pile of grain placed at the property boundary as incentive to keep moving along. Church authorities sometimes conducted special blessing ceremonies for infested homes. Priests would sprinkle holy water in corners while reciting Latin prayers specifically mentioning vermin. In severe cases, entire communities might hold processions around fields where priests would perform exorcisms on insects, formally excommunicating the pests from the church and, supposedly, forcing them to leave the area. Perhaps most unusual were the actual medieval court cases where insects and rodents were put on trial. In one famous case from the 1480s in Switzerland, beetles were summoned to court with legal documents posted on the trees where they lived. When no beetles appeared to defend themselves, shocking, the court appointed a human lawyer for them. After hearing arguments about the beetles' God-given right to eat, the court ruled that the insects could have a small designated feeding area but had to leave the main fields alone. Records don't indicate whether the beetles complied with this ruling. Number 5. Cats and other animal predators. Would you invite a skunk into your home to kill your mice? Medieval people sometimes did. Long before synthetic pesticides and commercial exterminators, medieval households relied on nature's own pest control system, predator animals. While today we might call an exterminator, medieval folks simply opened their doors to certain creatures specifically to hunt unwanted guests. Cats were medieval Europe's premier pest controllers. Unlike today's pampered house cats, medieval felines earned their keep by ruthlessly hunting mice and rats. Most households, from peasant huts to royal castles, maintained at least one working cat. These weren't pets in the modern sense, they were valued primarily for their hunting skills rather than companionship. Farm cats received no fancy food, they survived on a combination of milk, food scraps, and whatever prey they caught. Their effectiveness against rodents made them essential household members, though their cultural status fluctuated dramatically throughout the medieval period. During certain periods, particularly after the Black Death when rats and their plague-carrying fleas decimated Europe's population, cats enjoyed respected status as protectors of food supplies and property. However, at other times, particularly during witch hunts, cats, especially black ones, fell victim to superstition and were killed en masse due to perceived associations with witchcraft and the devil. This unfortunate periodic culling of cats sometimes led to subsequent explosions in rodent populations. Ferrets and weasels were also deliberately kept for pest control. These slender predators could chase rodents through tight spaces where even cats couldn't reach. Wealthy households sometimes kept trained ferrets to flush out rats from within walls and under floors. Records from medieval Britain show that some professional rat catchers would bring teams of ferrets when hired to clear an infestation. In rural areas, farmers encouraged barn owls by building special nesting boxes. A single family of barn owls could consume thousands of mice annually. Medieval farmers recognized this benefit and considered owls in and around farm buildings to be good fortune. Similarly, kestrels and other small birds of prey were sometimes encouraged to nest near granaries to control rodent populations in surrounding fields. Perhaps most surprisingly, some households kept domesticated snakes as pest controllers. Non-venomous species were sometimes allowed to live in the walls or cellars of homes, where they would silently hunt mice. Unlike cats, these reptilian helpers required no feeding and minimal care, making them efficient if somewhat unnerving housemates. For controlling insects rather than mammals, people kept ducks and chickens. Ducks were particularly effective against slugs and snails in garden areas, while chickens would enthusiastically consume virtually any bug they could catch. Some records indicate that chickens were specifically allowed into homes periodically to peck at bed bugs and other household insects. Number 4. Traps and physical control methods. Have you ever caught a mouse in your kitchen? Medieval trappers turned rodent catching into an art form. Without the convenience of hardware store mouse traps or commercial pest control services, medieval people demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in designing mechanical solutions to pest problems. Their handcrafted traps and barriers show an impressive understanding of animal behavior and physical principles. The most common rodent trap was a simple deadfall design, basically a weight suspended above bait that would drop when triggered. Medieval carpenters crafted these using available materials, typically a heavy stone or brick positioned above a trip mechanism. When a hungry mouse or rat tugged on the bait, the weight would fall, crushing the unsuspecting pest. These traps were reusable and required no special materials beyond what was readily available in any village. More sophisticated was the figure 4 trap, named for the shape of its trigger mechanism. This clever design used 3 carved wooden sticks arranged to hold up a heavy flat stone or box which would collapse when the trigger was disturbed. The trigger pieces had to be carefully carved to balance properly, showing the skill that went into even simple pest control devices. For wealthier households, specialized metal traps became available by the later medieval period. Metal workers created spring-loaded devices that would snap shut when triggered, similar to modern mouse traps but made entirely of hand-forged metal. These were expensive and typically only found in castles or wealthy merchants' homes. Live capture traps were also common, especially for households that kept cats. These were essentially one-way doors, a box or container with an entrance designed so animals could push their way in but not back out. The trapped rodents would then be either released far from home, a surprisingly humane approach for the time, or more commonly fed to waiting cats or dogs. Water bucket traps showed particular ingenuity. A plank or stick was balanced across the top of a water-filled bucket with bait at the center. When the mouse walked out to retrieve the bait, the plank would tip, dumping the rodent into the water below. Some versions included a floating piece of wood in the bucket that would continuously spin when a mouse tried to climb onto it, preventing escape until the homeowner could dispose of the pest. For flying insects, medieval kitchens often featured sticky hanging strips made from honeycomb or tree resin. These functioned much like modern fly paper, catching insects that flew into them. More active fly control came in the form of swatters made from horsehair attached to wooden handles or bundles of herbs that could be waved through the air. Physical barriers were important preventive measures. Grain stores were often elevated on mushroom-shaped stone pillars that rats couldn't climb. These staddle stones supported raised granaries and featured a wide capstone that prevented rodents from accessing the structure. This simple architectural innovation protected crucial food supplies without requiring constant attention. For bed bugs and fleas, medieval people created early versions of insect traps by placing sheep fleeces or similar materials on the floor around beds. The insects would become trapped in the fibers while seeking hosts during the night, and the fleeces could be removed and beaten or burned regularly. Number 3. Herbal remedies and natural repellents. Would you rub wormwood on your skin to avoid fleas? What about stuffing your mattress with foul-smelling herbs to keep bedbugs away? Before chemical pesticides, medieval households relied heavily on plants with natural repellent properties. These herbal solutions were often the first line of defense against pests, especially for common people who couldn't afford more elaborate methods. Strong-smelling herbs were the cornerstone of pest management. Wormwood, whose intensely bitter compounds repel many insects, was hung in bunches around storerooms and kitchens. The plant contains natural compounds that insects find repulsive, making it particularly effective against moths that might damage stored clothing or food. Similarly, tansy was planted near doorways and windows specifically to deter ants and flying insects from entering homes. Its distinctive strong odor masked the scents that would normally attract pests. For personal protection against lice and fleas, which were unfortunately common visitors to medieval bodies, people made herbal sachets containing pennyroyal, lavender, and mint. These would be carried in pockets or sewn into clothing. Pennyroyal in particular contains natural compounds similar to modern insect repellents. Though medieval users didn't understand the chemistry, they simply knew it worked. Lavender was particularly valued because its pleasant scent to humans coincided with its effectiveness against pests. Rue was another multi-purpose repellent herb, believed to ward off fleas, beetles, and even larger pests like toads and snakes. People would crush the leaves and scatter them on floors or stuff them into small cloth bags placed in food storage areas. The plant contains compounds that are genuinely toxic to many insects, making it one of the more effective natural remedies available. Artemisia and southernwood were strewn across floors during summer months when insects were most problematic. The practice of spreading herbs on floors served multiple purposes, adding pleasant scents to otherwise unsanitary living conditions while simultaneously deterring numerous pests. When walked upon, these herbs would release more of their repellent oils, refreshing their effectiveness. For rodent control, medieval kitchens often kept pots of mint growing near food storage areas. Rats and mice apparently disliked the smell of mint, making this a simple preventive measure. The advantage of growing living plants rather than using dried herbs was that the scent remained strong consistently rather than fading over time. Some herbal preparations were more complex. Records describe ointments made by infusing animal fat with herbs like wormwood, tansy, and rue. These greasy preparations would be smeared around entryways, window frames, and along baseboards to create barriers that crawling insects refused to cross. While undoubtedly effective to some degree, these concoctions must have added their own distinct aroma to medieval interiors. For stored grains, always vulnerable to weevils and other insects, bay leaves and coriander seeds were mixed directly with the grain. These natural preservatives helped keep pests from multiplying in food stores. The practice was so effective that variations continued well into the modern era before being replaced by commercial fumigants. Perhaps most fascinating was the medieval use of herbs with mild psychoactive properties to disorient insects. Certain garden herbs contain compounds that affect insect nervous systems. While medieval people didn't understand the neurological effects, they observed that some herbs seemed to confuse or stupefy insects, making them easier to control or kill. Number 2. Poisons and chemical control. Would you sprinkle arsenic around your kitchen to kill cockroaches? Medieval homeowners did. Long before EPA regulations and warning labels, medieval pest control often ventured into territory modern consumers would find alarming. Without scientific understanding of toxicology, people experimented with whatever substances seemed to kill pests, often with little regard for their own safety. Arsenic was perhaps the most commonly used rodenticide in medieval times. This highly toxic element was mixed with honey, fat, or flour to create poison baits for rats and mice. Arsenic compounds were relatively easy to obtain. They occurred naturally in certain mineral deposits and were already used in primitive medicines and metallurgy. The effectiveness of arsenic against rodents is undeniable, but its equally lethal effect on humans and pets created obvious hazards. Records from the period mention accidental poisonings from these homemade rodent baits, particularly affecting children. Mercury compounds presented another deadly option medieval pest controllers employed against bed bugs and lice. Mercury was processed into an ointment and applied to bed frames or even directly to the body to kill parasites. The toxin worked by penetrating the exoskeletons of insects and destroying their nervous systems. Unfortunately, it did much the same to humans with repeated exposure, though people at the time didn't connect the recurring symptoms of mercury poisoning tremors, cognitive impairment, and mood disorders to their pest control methods. Some medieval pest control recipes called for white hellebore, a flowering plant containing powerful alkaloid toxins. Ground into powder and mixed with grain, it created an effective rat poison. Like many plant-based toxins, hellebore targets the nervous system, causing paralysis and death in rodents. Unfortunately, it posed similar risks to humans and domestic animals who accidentally consumed it. For controlling ants and other crawling insects, medieval households sometimes used borax-like mineral compounds. These minerals, collected from certain dried lake beds, disrupted the digestive systems of insects while being somewhat less immediately toxic to mammals. Mixed with honey or sugar to attract insects, these powders were among the safer chemical controls available, though still handled with minimal precautions by modern standards. A peculiar but widespread practice involved using fermented or soured milk as an insect bait. The milk would be placed in shallow dishes with a small amount of arsenic or another toxin mixed in. Flies and other insects attracted to the smell would consume the poisoned liquid and die. This method targeted flying insects specifically and kept the poison somewhat contained in designated containers rather than spread throughout living spaces. Some medieval manuscripts describe mixing crushed glass with food bait for rodents, a brutal mechanical poison rather than a chemical one. The sharp fragments would cause internal bleeding after being consumed. This method, while not requiring special ingredients beyond broken glass pieces, was particularly inhumane and likely less effective than chemical alternatives, since animals might survive long enough to avoid similar baits in the future. By the later medieval period, some pest control practices began incorporating sulfur, burned as a fumigant to control insects in enclosed spaces. Rooms would be sealed, sulfur ignited on a metal dish, and the resulting dioxide gas would kill most insects. This early form of fumigation was surprisingly effective, though the residual smell and respiratory irritation it caused meant spaces needed thorough ventilation afterward. Perhaps most dangerously, some medieval pest control specialists prepared baits using compounds extracted from deadly nightshade and other highly toxic plants. These naturally occurring but potent toxins were effective against rodents but presented serious risks to the people preparing and deploying them, especially given the absence of protective equipment or proper handling protocols. Number 1. Sanitation and prevention. Did you know that medieval cities had professional street cleaners? Or that some towns imposed fines for improper garbage disposal 600 years ago? While medieval hygiene differs dramatically from modern standards, historical evidence reveals surprisingly sophisticated approaches to waste management and preventive pest control. Medieval communities understood the connection between filth and vermin, even without grasping the microbial causes of disease. Urban sanitation in medieval Europe varied widely by location and era, but was often more organized than popular perception suggests. Many larger towns employed official rakers or street cleaners responsible for removing waste from public areas. These municipal employees would collect garbage and animal dung, carting it to designated dumping locations outside city walls. In London, records from the 13th century show organized waste collection systems with scheduled raking days for different streets. Regulations governed waste disposal in many medieval towns. City ordinances prohibited throwing garbage directly into streets or waterways, with fines imposed on violators. Paris enacted laws as early as 1185 requiring homeowners to pile waste in specific locations rather than throwing it from windows, a practice that continued nonetheless, as repeated edicts against the behavior suggest. Some cities required residents to sweep the street in front of their homes weekly, creating a distributed sanitation system where each household maintained their immediate surroundings. Food storage technologies focused heavily on pest prevention. Grain, the dietary staple, received particular attention. Properly constructed granaries featured elevated floors and smooth walls to deter rodents. Some designs incorporated moats around storage buildings, not to keep human thieves away, but to prevent crawling insects and rodents from reaching the food. Grain would be periodically spread in thin layers in sunlight, allowing people to pick out insects or affected portions before returning it to storage. Smoke preservation served dual purposes, preserving food while simultaneously deterring pests. Smokehouse designs allowed meat and fish to be stored for extended periods, while the compounds in the smoke naturally repelled many insects. The practice of smoking foods developed not just for flavor, but as a crucial pest management technique in an era before refrigeration. Salt served similar multiple functions. Besides preserving food through dehydration, concentrated salt created environments inhospitable to most insects and microorganisms. Heavily salted foods rarely suffered pest infestations, making salt an essential indirect pest control substance throughout medieval Europe. For clothing and textiles, periodic airing and beating constituted the primary defense against moths and other fabric pests. Wardrobes were regularly emptied, with items hung outside on sunny days and beaten with specialized rods to dislodge insects and eggs. Wealthy households might dedicate servants specifically to this task, highlighting its importance in preserving valuable textiles. Architectural features often incorporated pest prevention elements. Building foundations sometimes included crushed glass, sharp stones, or other deterrents mixed into mortar specifically to discourage rodents from burrowing. Floor design evolved to prevent pest harborage. Smooth stone floors replaced earlier earthen floors in more prosperous homes precisely because they provided fewer hiding places for vermin. Kitchen design increasingly separated food preparation from waste areas. While early medieval kitchens might contain all functions in one space, later designs often separated slaughtering, butchery, and waste disposal from cooking areas, a practical evolution that reduced pest attraction to cooking spaces. Garden planning incorporated pest management principles as well. Certain companion planting practices emerged not just for agricultural efficiency, but specifically to repel garden pests. Garlic, onions, and leeks were planted alongside other crops partly for their pest-repelling properties, creating natural barriers against certain insects. Personal hygiene, while different from modern practices, included specific anti-pest measures. Regular combing with fine-toothed combs helped control head lice. These specialized grooming tools appear frequently in archaeological findings. Bathing practices, contrary to some popular misconceptions, did occur regularly among those who could afford it, with various herbal additions to bath water intended partly to deter body parasites. Medieval people understood that prevention through cleanliness and proper storage was far easier than eliminating established infestations. Their preventive approaches, while limited by available technology and understanding, demonstrate remarkable ecological awareness and practical problem-solving that formed the foundation for modern integrated pest management concepts. Ever wonder if our descendants will look back at our chemical-heavy pest control methods with the same mixture of horror and fascination that we view medieval arsenic rat baits? What might future generations think of our own pest management techniques when they look back 600 years from now?